All right, let's talk about addiction. So I'm a former video game addict and a former sugar addict. And I was a video game addict for 25 years and sugar addict for 15. The addiction started when I was a child, when I was 6 years old, and my parents went through a terrible divorce, and I was going through a lot of physical and verbal bullying in school. And I reached for sugar and video games to cope. The issue is that when I experienced stress or anticipated a new one or remembered an old one, I would go back and reach for sugar and video games over and over and over again. And what I developed over time is a model, a secular model for addiction that anyone can use that has been updated for the 21st century. What I've seen with this model is that every single person I've ever met and worked with addictions, whether it's sugar addictions or cigarettes or alcohol or screens or other behaviors or whatever it may be, they all go through these exact same 5 phases without exception. I haven't seen one yet. So the model is called TAME the Beast. T-A-M-E, the Beast. B-E-A-S-T. Beast is the 5 phases of addiction. All addictions begin with B, believing a stressful thought. I'm bored. No one loves me. He, she hurt me. He, she betrayed me. I don't belong. The world is unsafe. The world's unfair. I have to make a decision. There's not enough money. There's not enough time. There's too much to do. There's dozens and dozens, but those are some of the main ones. When people believe a stressful thought, then they have an E, the E in the Beast, and they have an emotional, physical stress response. Anxiety, pain, fear, rage, grief, jealousy, nervousness, anger, sadness, whatever it may be. Some emotional, physical stress response. And then they anesthetize with a vice. Sugar, screens, gambling, alcohol, street drugs, smoking, food, whatever it is. They use the substance or the activity to numb the sensations they feel from the stressful thought that they believed. Then the S in the Beast model is they smolder. They smolder in the consequences of the vice they used. So smolder is actually an acronym, but it captures the emotionality of what it's like after binging or using a vice. For the people listening and watching this, smolder is the experience. It's like what have I done? Just all this stuff. So the smolder stands for the 7 types of consequences. S is societal consequences. What society you're in really matters. So smoking in France is normal, but a smoking addiction in the United States and in many parts is not okay. M is monetary consequences. So people who gamble have a very different set of monetary consequences than those who are workaholics, is different from, say, food addicts, or different from, say, video game addicts. And even the video game addicts, some people, all they do is just play free online games. Other people spend thousands and thousands and thousands on equipment and gear and all the rest of it. The O in smolder stands for occupational consequences. So a workaholic has a very different set of work consequences than, say, someone who stays up really late every night playing video games. L is legal consequences. There are really no legal consequences to food addiction, but there are to street drugs. D is domestic consequences. So what's happening in the household that you're living in? Alcoholics or people who binge watch some screens or whatever it is, there's different domestic consequences depending on the vice you use in your situation. E is energy/health consequences. How is the vice affecting your energy health? So someone who's an exercise addict has a different set of health consequences than someone who sits all day and watches screens and movies. Then there are the relationship consequences, how your vice affects your relationships. So smolder is how your vice causes damage. And that's actually a key distinction between an addiction and someone who's just like a social drinker, for example. People can drink alcohol and not be addicts. It's when it becomes damaging and they don't stop despite the damage. That's when it's an addictive cycle. T in the Beast model is the terrible thoughts about oneself after the smolder. So you believe a stressful thought like, he, she betrayed me. Then I have an emotional, physical stress response of anxiety and anger. Then I numb out with sugar. And then I can't sleep, like my energy / health is compromised because I can't sleep because my blood sugar is all screwed up. And then in the morning I'm like, oh God, I'm so stupid. How could I have wasted a night's sleep? Now on this and that. And if I believe those stressful thoughts, terrible thoughts about myself, then I feel bad, want to numb out, have consequences, have more terrible thoughts. If I believe them, then I feel bad, and round it goes. A very important distinction is the thoughts that initiate the addiction cycle are not the same thoughts that perpetuate it. That's really, really important. A lot of people get fixated on dealing with the I'm a piece of XYZ thoughts, like I'm such a bad person thoughts, the shame thoughts, and they're stuck here in the 5th phase and they don't back up to the root thoughts, which the root stressful thoughts that started the cycle in the first place. So with addiction, there's very specific ways to step out of each phase. Okay? Number 1 is to identify that you're stuck in the cycle. That's the TAME of the Tame the Beast model. TAME. If you catch yourself in the cycle, T stands for take a breath. A is accept you're in the cycle. M is make a decision to exit the cycle. And then E is exit the cycle. How you exit depends on what phase you're stuck in. So the way to exit, there's specific ways for each phase. If you apply the wrong methodology to the wrong phase, you'll get stuck. So each phase is very specific. Each phase begins with an RE word, to deal with the belief of the beast is you resolve the root of addiction, like identifying and questioning your stressful thoughts. So using things like the work of Byron Katie or EMDR or EFT or neuroemotional technique or cognitive behavior therapy or whatever technique works to help you identify and question and resolve those root belief systems. That's what you should go for. And people resonate with different techniques. There's not one specific one. For the emotional physical stress response, that to get out of that, that's about resilience. That's the 10 pillars of health. How do you increase your resilience? You look at your 10 pillars of health. Your brain and hormone system, your bowel and digestion, your body structure, untreated injuries, bad dental work, genetics, your exercise. Are you doing high intensity interval training and walking? If so, are you overdoing your high intensity? You get out of jogging, doing the marathon, stop the marathoning, etc. That'll lower your resilience. You look at your pillar number 5, biotoxins, your toxic exposure. Pillar number 6 is bionutrients. You look at your diet, your nutrition, and all the genetics and functional testing therein. You look at pillar 7 is your breakfast and routines. Do you have a good breakfast? Do you have good routines? Pillar number 8, you look at your bothers or stressors in your world. Pillar number 9 is bugs, hidden infections, and mold exposure. And pillar number 10 is your sleep. So your resilience will determine how emotionally reactive you are to a stressful thought. There's plenty of people who have the same stressful thoughts an addict does, but they're not an addict because they have higher resilience. So how do you build your resilience? Is the 10 pillars of health. The third phase, the anesthetize, where you reach for your vice of choice, that's about reduce, remove, and replace the vice. So you reduce your exposure to the vice. So you look at the people, places, time of day, and circumstance where you're within arm's reach of your vice. Say if it's sugar, is it in the kitchen? Is that one cupboard in the kitchen? Is it in the glove compartment in the car? Is it that little snack bowl of the fridge at work or in or somewhere else in work? Where are you within reach? People. Is this, do you have certain buddies that you like to eat sugar with or go drinking with or go gambling with or whatever it is? You look at the people that are putting you within arm's reach. Places, people, places, time of day. Is it the afternoon? Is it the morning? Is it after meals? Is it before meals? Is it during meals? Is it in the evening? Is it wake up? Is it in the middle of the night? What's the time of day that you start craving it? And circumstance. Is it a particular holiday? Is it a particular time of the week? Is it a particular event? Is there something that's triggering it? So you reduce your exposure. You ideally remove the vice from within reach. Or you replace. Replacing is temporarily changing your vice for something less damaging that causes less damage in the smolder categories. But the difference between replacing a vice and cross-addicting is what direction of the cycle you're going. If you're cross-addicting, you trade out, alcohol for exercise, but you're still spinning around, where every time you feel stressed out from believing a stressful thought, you just gotta go for a run, gotta go for a run, gotta go for a run. You're still spinning, you just cross-addicted to something, a different vice that's seemingly less damaging. And it may genuinely be less damaging, but you're still stuck in the addictive cycle. Replacing is different. Replacing is, I will consciously pick a less damaging vice in order to buy time to improve my resilience and deal with my root stressful thoughts. You're going in the other direction. That's the difference between replacing and cross-addicting. It's a very important critical distinction. For the smolder phase, when you're looking at the 7 categories of consequences: societal, monetary, occupational, legal, domestic, energy, /health, and relationships, you reverse the damage. You identify what consequences have been rendered, which vary wildly between people depending on the individual person, the circumstance, the type of vice, how much they use a vice, how much the vice affects them, what society they're in. So many variations. That's not a problem, because the very next column is, what is the single smallest, easiest to implement thing you can do that's winnable to start to reverse the damage. You go for the smallest change first, not the biggest, because people are stuck in addictions. They generally don't have the best self-esteem, so you want to build momentum by picking the smallest things first. And this is individualized. You just identify the consequences and you identify what's the smallest step to do to reverse the damage. Done. And you do it. And if you don't feel you can, then you work on your stressful beliefs and you work on your resilience. And then you come back to it. For the T, the terrible thoughts about oneself, you reach out for help. This is where you find community. This is where you find support. There are certain people you don't ask for help. Anyone who will shame you about your addiction and think shaming you is going to help you, run. You cannot shame someone out of an addiction. At best, you can temporarily stop them using the vice, but the shame is just compounding more stressful beliefs on them, and eventually they'll crack and they'll start the cycle over again. Just get the people who shame you out of your life. For whatever their source of their shame is, however justified they think it is, whatever thing they're quoting, if they're shaming you, they're not helping you. You need to find people who are supportive. Ideally, other people who are former addicts. I don't like the term recovering addict because it has a stench of permanency around it. People can do their vice again when they've fully recovered. And some people say, once an addict, always an addict. Okay, there's utility in that phrase because it keeps people from potentially slipping into a binge. There's utility, but it's not accurate, and I can prove it. How many food addicts have recovered from their food addiction yet still eat? All of them. So you can still eat food and not be a former food addict. I'm not saying people are alcoholics should be, oh sure, I'll just take a sip now that I'm fine. I'm saying it's possible. I'm not saying you should do it, but you can't do this I'm permanently recovering nonsense. It is technically untrue. It is clinically useful for some people just to keep them away from the thing that can send them totally spiraling out of control, but it's not accurate. So reaching out for help. This is finding community, finding support, finding coaches, finding a system to help you with addiction. Other thing I want to talk about is the word addiction itself. Addiction is a very loaded term. People think the word an addict, they think of someone shivering in the corner, vomiting in a bucket with either a needle in their arm or an empty whiskey bottle in their hand. Okay? That's a very small percentage of addicts. It's very, visually gripping. But it's not the vast majority of addicts by far. Really, the term should be replaced by the term cannibalism. And that's not my term. That's a term from two brilliant interventionists called Wainwright and Pognanovich from the UK, who wrote a book, It's Not Okay to Be a Cannibal. They talk about it in terms of cannibalism because, one, it's more accurate a term. Addiction cannibalizes yourself and the environment and people around you. That's how you know it's a real addiction, because it's destroying you and the environment around you and the people around you. If you say addict, so many people say, oh, I'm not an addict. No, I'm not. But they're destroying everything around them. But if you frame it in terms of cannibalism, is this behavior causing destruction? Is this consuming things? It makes much more sense. Additionally, ironically, it's actually more optimistic to say it's cannibalism as opposed to addiction, because we got rid of cannibalism around the world. So if we can say that about addiction, there's more optimism in it, strangely enough. I also think it's way more accurate, because cannibalism is about the behavior, not some deep moral flaw. Unfortunately, a lot of circles in the addiction space think using the vice is a moral failing, or that you have to shame them out of it, or whatever. And I don't think that's healthy or useful. They can get temporary success by removing the destructive vice from use, which has its utility. If someone's a raging alcoholic and they've been shamed into not using alcohol, but they pick another vice that's way less damaging. A lot of people, they just want the alcohol to stop and they're happy with that. And that's not nothing. That is not nothing. And but there's much more that's available. So this model, Tame the Beast of Addiction, this is the model that I want to be the dominant alternative to 12-step worldwide. 12-step has had its function. It helps barely 10% of the people that join it. That's not a great statistic, and that's their statistics. A lot of people don't do 12-step because they're so they don't resonate with the top-heavy theism that comes with the 12-step program. And some people may say, oh, it's a thing of your own understanding. I was like, you know what? That's still top-heavy theism. Sorry. That it is. It really is. And I don't care how much you sugarcoat it or change the word. It's theistic. It really is. I made a secular model. Not because I'm against people who are religious. It's because secular means mathematics is secular. There's no religion attached to it. Anyone can use it. This model is for anyone that they can use it. People who are into, they can use this model too. It's a secular doesn't mean anti-religious. It means it's just in the world. It's like mathematics. So I want people to have a system available to them that is not top-heavy in theism. If the top-heavy theism works, great, go do 12-step. I hope that works for you. And for some people, it really does. I want this model to be available, and that's my life mission. And it's what I'm here to do. So I teach about this model through the examples of food, specifically sugar, and through the examples of screens, specifically video games. Because my two vices were sugar and video games. Not everyone can relate to video games. Most people can relate to screens. Not everyone can relate to sugar, but most people can had an experience with food, whether it was chocolate or bread or whatever it is. So these are the two most common growing addictions worldwide, food and screens, especially as we're airdropping smartphones into third world countries and they're just getting exposed to screens right away. So that's my model for addiction. I've got lots of information on it. I have an ebook on it. I've got lots of people recording me on podcasts. I have an online course on it. I feel like even if you don't think you have an addiction, I can guarantee you know someone who does that needs this help. And if you can share this with them, you are making the world a better place. Thank you.